In Taoist philosophy, the human body contains three fundamental treasures called the Sanbao. These are Jing, Qi, and Shen. Think of them as three different states of energy within you. Jing is your essence, your vital life force. It's the densest, most physical form of energy. Qi is your vital energy, the force that animates you and flows through your meridians. Shen is your spirit, your consciousness, the most refined form of energy. Now here's where it gets interesting. The Taoists discovered something profound. These three treasures can be transformed into each other. Jing can be refined into Qi. Qi can be refined into Shen. This process is called internal alchemy, or Nidan. Your Jing comes from two sources. You inherit prenatal Jing from your parents at conception. This is finite, like a battery you're born with. Then there's postnatal Jing, which you create from food, water, air, and rest. But here's the critical part. Sexual essence, your semen, is considered the most concentrated and potent form of Jing in the male body. The ancient Taoists observed that every ejaculation depletes your Jing reserves. And unlike Qi, which you can replenish relatively quickly through breathing and eating, Jing is much harder to restore. Losing too much Jing leads to premature aging, weakness, disease, and early death. Think about it this way. Imagine you have a reservoir of vital essence. Every time you ejaculate, you're draining from that reservoir. The Taoists weren't being prudish or sex-negative. They were being scientific observers of cause and effect in the human body. One of the oldest and most important texts in Chinese medicine is the Huangdi Neijing, the Yellow Emperor's classic of internal medicine. This text, written over 2,000 years ago, contains explicit instructions about sexual practices and semen retention. The text describes a conversation between the Yellow Emperor and his physician, Bo. The emperor asks why men in ancient times lived to be over 100 years old and remained active and vigorous, while men of the current age grow weak and die at 50. Bo's answer is fascinating. He explains that the ancients understood the Tao, the way of nature. They practiced moderation in eating and drinking. They avoided excess in sexual activity. They preserved their Jing. They cultivated their Qi through breathing practices. They kept their spirit calm and undisturbed. The text specifically states that excessive ejaculation in men leads to depletion of kidney essence. In traditional Chinese medicine, the kidneys are considered the storehouse of Jing. When you ejaculate frequently, you drain the kidneys, leading to symptoms like lower back pain, weak knees, hearing loss, premature graying of hair, memory problems, and fatigue. The Yellow Emperor's classic even provides specific guidelines. It suggests that a healthy young man in his 20s might ejaculate every 4 days without depleting himself. A man in his 30s every 8 days. A man in his 40s every 16 days. And a man over 50 should consider preserving his semen entirely unless trying to conceive. These aren't arbitrary numbers. They're based on observations of how long it takes the body to replenish its Jing reserves at different ages. So how exactly does retaining semen lead to increased vitality and longevity? The Taoists developed a detailed understanding of this mechanism. When you retain your semen, the Jing doesn't just sit there. Through specific practices, you can transform it. The most important practice is called circulating the light, or the Microcosmic Orbit meditation. Here's how it works. When sexual energy builds up, but isn't released through ejaculation, it creates heat and pressure in the lower dantian, an energy center located about 3 finger widths below your navel. This is called the furnace in Taoist alchemy. Through breathing techniques and mental focus, you circulate this heated Jing up the spine through the Du meridian, which runs from the perineum up the back to the crown of the head. This is the Yang channel. Then you bring it down the front of the body through the Ren meridian, the Yin channel, completing the circuit. As the Jing circulates, it transforms. Moving up the spine, it becomes Qi, energizing your organs and nervous system. Continuing upward to the head, Qi refines into Shen, enhancing mental clarity, intuition, and spiritual awareness. This is why Taoist masters who practiced long-term retention were described as having bright, penetrating eyes, incredible mental focus, and an almost magnetic presence. They had successfully converted their sexual essence into spiritual radiance. But there's another crucial element. The Taoists taught specific techniques called locking the gate, or sealing the essence. These are physical practices involving the PC muscle, breath control and visualization, to prevent ejaculation even during sexual activity. This allowed Taoist practitioners to enjoy sexual intimacy without depleting their Jing. Why did the Taoists believe this practice led to extended lifespan? The reasoning is actually quite logical when you understand their framework. They observed that all animals have a limited number of heartbeats, breaths, and reproductive events in their lifetime. Animals that reproduce rapidly and frequently tend to die young. Animals that reproduce slowly and conserve their essence live longer. Consider the male salmon. After one massive ejaculation event to fertilize eggs, the salmon ages rapidly and dies within days. The Taoists saw this pattern everywhere in nature. The life force is intimately connected to reproductive essence. In humans, they noticed that men who were extremely sexually active in youth often became weak and sick in middle age. Meanwhile, those who practiced moderation or retention maintained their vigor into old age. There's also a practical biochemical aspect the ancients understood intuitively. Semen contains incredibly concentrated nutrients: zinc, selenium, proteins, enzymes, hormones. Every ejaculation requires the body to expend significant resources to produce replacement semen. This is metabolically expensive. By retaining, you're not forcing your body into this constant production cycle. The resources that would go into making semen are redirected to other repair and maintenance functions. Your body can focus on cellular regeneration, immune function, and healing rather than constant reproductive readiness. The Taoists also connected Jing to bone marrow and brain function. They believed that preserved Jing helps maintain healthy bone marrow, which produces blood and immune cells. They also thought it nourishes the brain and prevents cognitive decline. Modern science is actually starting to find correlations here. Research shows that sexual activity and ejaculation frequency do affect testosterone levels, energy levels, and even athletic performance, though the research is still debated and ongoing. But for the Taoists, longevity wasn't just about living more years. It was about spiritual cultivation and ultimately achieving immortality. Now, when Taoists talked about immortality, they weren't necessarily talking about living forever in a physical body. They were describing different levels of spiritual achievement. The lowest level was health and longevity, living to a natural old age of 120 or more years in full vitality. The next level was becoming an earth immortal, someone who could live several hundred years through mastery of internal alchemy. Beyond that were the spirit immortals who could supposedly transcend physical death entirely. Whether you believe in these higher attainments or not, the point is that semen retention was seen as the foundation of the spiritual path. You cannot build a skyscraper without a foundation. You cannot achieve advanced spiritual states if you're constantly depleting your fundamental essence. The sexual energy, when retained and cultivated, becomes rocket fuel for meditation and spiritual practice. Many Taoist texts describe how retained Jing makes it easier to achieve deep meditative states, experience visions, develop psychic abilities, and ultimately attain enlightenment. Famous Taoist immortals like Zhang Sanfeng, the legendary creator of Tai Chi, and Lu Dongbin, one of the 8 immortals, were said to have mastered these practices. The stories describe them as having incredible longevity, supernatural abilities, and radiant health well into old age. Whether these stories are literal or metaphorical, they point to a sophisticated understanding of human energy cultivation that modern society has largely forgotten. So what can we take from these ancient Taoist teachings? Even if you don't believe in circulating qi or becoming an immortal, there's practical wisdom here. First, the Taoists understood that sexual energy is your creative life force. How you use it matters. Wasting it carelessly through compulsive behavior or pornography addiction depletes you physically and mentally. Second, they recognized that moderation is key. They weren't advocating for complete lifelong celibacy for everyone. They taught that young men building their vitality should be more conservative. Men trying to achieve specific goals, whether in martial arts, meditation, or creative work, should retain during intensive training periods. Men in relationships should find balance with their partners. Third, they understood that retention without transformation leads to stagnation. You can't just lock everything up and expect magic to happen. You need practices: meditation, breathwork, physical exercise, qigong, tai chi. These practices circulate and refine the retained energy. Fourth, The Taoists were holistic. Retention was always part of a complete lifestyle, including proper diet, herbal medicine, adequate sleep, harmony with nature's rhythms, and emotional balance. You can't retain semen while eating garbage, never sleeping, and living in constant stress and expect miracles. Finally, they taught that this practice builds willpower and self-mastery. In a world of instant gratification, the ability to delay pleasure and redirect energy toward higher goals is incredibly valuable. This self-discipline spills over into every area of life. The Taoist approach to semen retention is thousands of years old, yet it speaks to something timeless about human energy and potential. Whether you're interested in longevity, spiritual development, athletic performance, or just understanding your own body better, these teachings offer a framework worth exploring.